Thank you for the friendly introduction and the invitation, the conveners, the ZIF, the Bielefeld weather, and for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I'm not arriving here with a fully fledged thesis that I want to prove, but rather present some observations, and I'm curious about what you think in this think tank. To start with something apparently very remote, in the year 2013, before our time, the Chinese chief minister, Li Si, petitioned the emperor to destroy by fire all historical records, to rule that any man who possessed the writings of the 100 schools and the ancient literature must immediately surrender them to the magistrates to be burned. The petition was approved. In addition, 460 of the greatest scholars who were suspected of knowing the books so thoroughly that they could teach from memory were buried alive. This manuscript from the 18th century tells the story, and we see there's a couple of details: burning books, scholars are buried alive, and the one official history book is handed over to the emperor. And I'm not an expert in Chinese history, but the story was told in a book on copyright from 1980, where it serves to illustrate the historic roots of concepts of copyright. And the pertinent concept here is control. The story, of course, illustrates a very extreme and radical example of how to control content by means of censorship rather than copyright. However, censorship and copyright are not so distant relatives historically. The subject would be worth exploring further, but I need to leave it here as a memento sensui, maybe. The rest of the paper consists of 3 parts. The first will explore aspects of Renaissance prints and their proto-copyright regime. The second will deal with what a cartoonist has called the profit motive and the relationship between creation and destruction. And the third part will ask some questions about Richard Prince's latest appropriation art. And this sounds relatively disparate, and it is, but I'm confident that we will identify some connecting elements. In his study on copyright in the Renaissance, Christopher Whitcomb mentions Titian, who lived and worked in Venice in the 16th century, and who wanted to publish prints after his designs, which he commissioned from the Dutch engraver Cornelis Cort. A prominent example, you can see here, the engraving after the painting of the Holy Trinity from 1566. Before publication, Titian had the print to be approved by the official censor. An official body for that purpose had been established in 1545 by the Venetian Council of Ten, and that was called the Riformatori dello Studio di Padova. That consent given, Titian could now apply for a license from the chiefs of the Council of Ten. You see, the administrative workings were almost as complicated as they are today, which he did 4 days after receiving the approval of the censor. It was granted another 2 weeks later. This means that prints underwent a similar content control as books did. I'll show you this list of prohibited books dating only 2 years earlier than Titian's print. Other states and jurisdictions established similar procedures throughout Europe, where the invention of the letterpress and the establishment of a market for printed images had not only boosted the economy, but was also seen as a political danger. It will be enough to mention the keyword reformation here and to set off that film. Now, with his license in hand, Titian now applied for a privilege to the Senate of Venice, which he also obtained in due course. This privilege served to protect his investments against other printers and artists and engravers and potential counterfeiters. It was a public declaration that it was prohibited to copy the print and that Titian was its author. The privilege was indicated together with the date and the names of the designer at the bottom of the print, small print indeed on the print, cum privilegio Cornelio Cortis fecit and Titianus as the author, which is impossible to see, but they're located here, 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 and there. Let's step back for a moment and take a look at the underlying structure. Here, just as a little reminder, all this is not new to any historian of copyright, but it will serve to distinguish some elements of potential conflicts of interest which haven't changed since the 16th century. Censorship can become active both before and after publication of work, which happens, the creation in the artist's studio, after publication in the public, and of course censorship is more complicated to implement once you have published an edition of 100 or so prints than it would be just by not giving a license to an artist. The privilege is different, it's a protection of the investment, and this is exactly what Titian also said in his application, or supplicatio to the Senate, when he wrote that he applied for a privilege for his print because some men, ignorant of art, in order to avoid the work and out of greed for profit, put themselves in this task of copying prints, thereby defrauding the honor of the inventor of the prints, that is his own honor, Titian's honor as an artist, by depreciating them and profiting from the labors of others, again Titian and his printer, besides cheating the public with a forged print of little value. We know of very few historic cases that dealt with this conflict of interests. In the eyes of the artists applying for a privilege, it served to defend their freedom of expression, as it both ensured the integrity of their artistic creation, which touches on our modern concept of moral rights, and the revenue of their investment, as printing was time-consuming and expensive, and pirated copies undermined the market of the originals. Albrecht Dürer is a comparatively well-documented early example of a proper case. He had obtained imperial privileges for his 1511 book edition of some of his print series, such as The Passion of Christ, The Life of the Virgin, and The Apocalypse. Soon after, in 1500, this is Dürer. The city council of Nuremberg decided a case in 1512 of what we would call copyright infringement today, ordering that, that's a quote, the foreigner who sold prints in front of the town hall in Nuremberg, some with Albrecht Dürer's monogram that were fraudulently copied from him, shall be bound by oath to remove all the said monograms and sell none of them here. So it's not about the prints, the copies are fine, but the monograms, the copying of the monogram is not. And if he refuses, all his said prints shall be confiscated as counterfeit and taken into the hands of the council. I guess it's not a way of fundraising the city council, but you see the basic conflict of interest is there's a pirated edition of Dura Prince around Nuremberg, and the city council rules that it's wrong to sell them, but not because the copies are copies of Dura's prints, but because the monogram was copied with them. The story has been popularized by Giorgio Vasari in his Lives of the Artist, where he sets the case in Venice and claimed that Dura had specifically sued the Italian printmaker Marcantonio Raimondi for infringing his privilege. In the end, this story cannot be verified. It's quite unlikely, actually, that it happened, but Vasari must have known the decision from Nuremberg, because indeed the verdict that he speaks of corresponds exactly to the one we know from the sources. Copies are okay, copying the artist's monogram is not, and protection is granted for the artist's identity mark or trademark. That's what served to protect the market, and it is what distinguished the genuine work of art from the copy. I conclude this part with a cartoon which sums it all up. For artists wanting to copy other works of art, the effects of censorship and copyright can be very similar. However, the purpose in relation to freedom of art is very different. Censorship is meant, the privilege was meant to serve as an incentive on the art market, and it's what many people still think what copyright should do. And the other, censorship, is an effect of political control, very radical control. Politics and copyright are similarly convoluted in contemporary street art. Indeed, to speak of street art is a relatively recent phenomenon. It used to be called graffiti and Schmiererei and a problem in public space. The Swiss street artist Harald Nägeli was convicted to 9 months prison by the High Court of the Canton of Zurich in the early 1980s. Nägeli escaped to Germany, but the Swiss, Western Germany that is, but the Swiss authorities pursued his extradition. The German Federal Constitutional Court finally ruled that the freedom of art guaranteed by Article 5 of the German Grundgesetz did not apply to illegal graffiti, which is why Nägeli's extradition was considered to be legal. He crossed the border together with Joseph Beuys, as you can see, and was imprisoned without further delay, serving 6 of his 9 months sentence. But the times are changing. When the University of Zurich refurbished part of their campus between 1995 and 2004, this graffito in the Schoenberg was considered a work of art that was worth preserving by Nägeli. It even had been cluttered with new graffiti, though, mark the irony, and needed cleaning. Here we see Harald Nägeli retracing some of the lines and helping to clean it. And this is what it looks today. It's considered a mural and part of the university's cultural heritage. Indeed, street art can be protected as a work of art as any other, and even under copyright laws. So the underlying structure is quite similar to what we already know from Renaissance prints, although the agents show different labels. Instead of censorship, here we have the problem of ownership or property setting a limit to creative acts. You're not allowed to spray your art anywhere you want to, namely on walls that you don't own. And indeed, some argue that illegal works of art do not enjoy copyright protection. One could extrapolate that for pornography as well, but that would take too long. The prevailing contemporary view, however, is to differentiate between intellectual property and material property, which also means that the owner of the wall supporting your prospective work may well overpaint it or transfer it to another place or to destroy it. There is a growing choice of cases involving street art creators and their intellectual property. I've arbitrarily chosen this more recent one from 2014, when Miami-based artist David Anasagasti, better known as A-Hole Sniffs Glue, sued the fashion company American Eagle Outfitters. The Eagles had fashioned their marketing campaign for beachwear around one of Anasagasti's murals in Miami without asking for a license. The case was so often in the art world, settled outside the courtroom. Maybe that was a good thing, to avoid a free-floating balancing test, of which we have been warned yesterday. The case looks clear enough anyway. From the perspective of the observer, the mural is perhaps even closer to a Renaissance wall painting. At the other end of the street art works, however, is the tag. The city of Hamburg is plastered with these Oz tags and is equally famous or infamous smileys. Oz was a street artist or graffiti sprayer, depending on which side you want to look at it, who died in 2014 while he was tagging. He was hit by a train near the central station. In total, Oz, whose real name was Walter Josef Fischer, spent more than 8 years of his life in prison for his art or tags. Hamburgian street artists still celebrate him and his art. He is called the godfather of street art in Hamburg, or king of the world even. But you can read in legal literature that a tag is not copyright protectable, as it doesn't pass the originality test. Perhaps this is the reason why you can buy bags with tags, with Oz tags printed on them in a variety of quite tasteless colors. Perhaps it's worth reminding ourselves of Titian's application for a privilege when he deplored that some men, ignorant of art, in order to avoid the work and out of greed for profit, put themselves in this task of copying prints, thereby defrauding the honor of the inventor of the prints by depreciating them and profiting from the labors of others, besides cheating the public with a forged print of little value. William Hogarth, when arguing for a copyright law for prints in 1735, almost used the same words, and my guess is that most street artists would subscribe to that view. The elephant in the room here is, of course, Banksy. I leave him out there, although he's an interesting example of the ongoing professionalization of the genre, but too complex to be a part of this 30-minute installment of copyright history. While remaining anonymous, he has founded a company to handle the business. Even illegal artistic activity meets the basic demand from the market here. Other artists are more radical. The famous Italian street artist Blue, whose identity remains unknown, has erased all the murals from the walls of the city of Bologna in protest at the exhibition Street Art, Banksy and Co., L'arte allo stato urbano, which is currently on view at the Museo della Storia di Bologna. The gesture is both emphasizing the value of the integrity of a work of art and the fact that context is an integral part of the artwork. Site specificity, so street art is good on the street, in the public space, and it's not good as a commercial asset, as part of a museum show. That's the difference here. Site specificity, of course, is something that's not restricted to the discourse on street art alone, as the case of Richard Serra's Tilted Arc has demonstrated. Erected in 1981 in front of a federal building in Manhattan, it incited prolonged controversies and was finally dismantled in 1989, the year before the Visual Artists' Rights Act, VARA, was enacted, which introduced moral rights to the US copyright system. It was cut into 3 parts, which remain stored in a warehouse. The artist regards the work as destroyed because removed from its intended site. He also noted that, in disregarding this argument and considering the work as movable, the authorities have made the work exactly, that's his quote, exactly what it was intended not to be, a mobile, marketable product, end of quote. While the case doesn't involve illicit copying, it reveals important foundations of what copyright law is also about, and that is the question of who controls the work of art, again. Not only its creation, but also its perception. Copyright law is but one aspect of the issue and cannot alone solve these problems. Final part, Richard Prince, from one Richard to another Richard, so it's Richard Prince. Or I can call it Richard Prince. Sorry, it's a really awful pun, but it was a main incentive for me to do this talk. I love bad puns. Because indeed, and that's true, Richard Prince, he prints, according to his short autobiographical text, after he discovered Tumblr at his daughter's home and subsequently turned his iPhone into a portable studio. For somebody specializing in appropriation art, as Richard Prince is, the internet and its images constitute an endless stream of material. Yesterday we have been reminded of John Locke's metaphor of the fountain and the pitcher. I re-quote this, though the water running in the fountain be everyone's, yet who can doubt but that in the pitcher is his only who drew it out. End of quote. Copyright-protected work are pitchers, indeed, but in digital form they appear to be splashes from a fountain flowing into your iPhone. I will not go into the history of appropriation art. It's itself a worthy subject for consideration, but instead focus on Richard Prince's more recent body of work, which is entitled New Portraits. And these are inkjet prints on canvas, measuring roughly 167 by 124 centimeters, and they show screenshots from other people's Instagram accounts. The iconography is very much in line with Richard Prince's usual interests and therefore include mostly half-erotic photographs to please white, male, heterosexual tastes. This raises other questions about the agency of internet platforms and perception patterns. I won't go into that. What's important to us being interested in copyright is that Richard Prince also screenshot his own comments on each copied photograph, which thus become part of the composition. Now, you probably can't decipher this, but the last line or last two lines always a comment by Richard Prince himself from his Instagram account, Richard Prince 4. They serve as his vehicle of appropriation. As soon as as 38 of these Instagram canvases were exhibited at the Gagosian Gallery in New York, offered for roughly $90,000 each, critics went up the wall. Immediately, the questions were raised whether the new portraits infringed copyright of those Instagram users who had originally uploaded the images to the social media platform. Richard Prince was deemed an immoral artist or met with comment headlines such as "Richard Prince sucks." Here. Returning to the relatively short history of assessing appropriation art against the fair use test, which is pertinent here, and which includes a couple of famous legal cases involving both Jeff Koons and Richard Prince himself, commentators discussed the then theoretical outcome of a lawsuit against Richard Prince's new portraits. They didn't have to wait long. Another iconographic familiar here, the Rastafarian, as the photographer Donald Graham sued Richard Prince this very January for copyright infringement. Prince responded last month, claiming that his use was transformative and fair use. The case is still pending. Interestingly, Prince did not take the photograph from Graham, who doesn't show his work on Instagram, but from another user who had uploaded Graham's work, Rasta J92, which directs us towards Instagram's terms and conditions. Whoever the user Rasta J92 is, she or he didn't have a license to upload Graham's photograph in the first place. Instagram's small print, it's really small, slightly enlarged here, states that users own the content posted or at least have the right to grant Instagram a license to host that content. And judging from one of his interviews, where this quote comes from, Richard Prince is very aware of these terms. Free advertisement, plus there are rules, and if you don't pay attention to them, you get kicked off. Indeed, he doesn't repost the appropriated Instagram posts one-to-one, but photographs of his inkjet canvas prints representing these posts. This is very consistent with his view filed for the District Court of the Southern District of New York in this most recent case, namely that his work is transformative and thus merits the fair use exception. It also prompted a comment by another Instagram user that I won't read out loud here because it's not appropriate. I'm now not an expert in ontology, but I would like to conclude with some observations provoked by details of how Richard Prince's new portraits were and are still presented in the double meaning of the word. Firstly, the gallery hosting the prints in Tokyo last year published a press release commenting on the comments by Richard Prince underneath the original Instagram posts. They supposedly, that's a quote, embolden his authorship, while the final inkjet canvas is a fusion of appropriated authorship and Richard Prince's own artistic freedom. The result being handled with a signature. This is the presentation of the work. Now for the present. One of Prince's appropriatees, one could call them, Instagram user Nightcore Girl, asked the appropriator to sign another one of her Instagram selfies, which she did, and sent to her, the size of a large pizza. The gift was, of course, acknowledged on Instagram. Richard Prince not only signed the print with pen and ink, but again put his own comments underneath the appropriated image. This constellation now is not problematic in view of copyright, as we can suppose that Nightcore Girl granted Richard Prince a license to use her own work for him to sign and to copy. Now, checking the original Instagram posts that Richard Prince used for his portrait series, one finds that he has deleted his own comments that show on his inkjet canvas prints that he's selling for 90,000 a piece. And by now he's also deleted his Richard Prince 4 account. He's using a Richard Prince 1, 2, 3, 4 account now. It's a very subtle case of deletion as creation, because it's the deletion of his signature and his signature comments that turns the appropriated Instagram post into something original by Richard Prince, which by now is unretrievable to us if we dive into the same fountain of images that Instagram provides. So Richard Prince's art may suck, but it effectively conserves a constructed moment in the digital stream of social media. The deletion of the original comments, and ultimately the account used to post them, reveals the dimensions of a digital intervention that very well may qualify as a transformative use. Not only does Richard Prince break other users' pinchers to return their content into the common fountain, he immediately refills their water into his own pitcher, which he seals off and sails, proving that he can have the cake and eat it too. You may ask, what's all this that links all these little cases together? A tentative answer lies in the signature or the artist's monogram, his trademark. 500 years ago, the Council of Nuremberg ruled that it's not the image but the monogram that is protected against copying. Richard Prince proves that still today. It's this kind of sign that ultimately constitutes a work of art, by reducing the transformative element of his appropriated art to just that, his signature in the limited appearance of a comment on Instagram. I wonder when he will turn to Snapchat, maybe next. Finally, the case of Oz shows us that some animals out there are more equal than others, and that tagging the internet results in millions of dollars, while tagging walls send you to prison. Again, copyright cannot be isolatedly examined to assess the question, who is in control of art? Behind a successful balancing of intellectual property claims against the freedom of art stands indeed a balance of powers. So maybe we need to read our Montesquieu again. Montesquieu. In the appeals court decision of the Patrick Cariou versus Richard Prince case, the court reasoned that Richard Prince and Patrick Cariou did not operate in the same market segment, which was one factor why Prince's appropriations were considered to be fair use. As evidence, the court seriously used the guest list of the opening of Richard Prince's show at the Gagosian Gallery, which included Brangelina, Jeff Koons, and other celebrities. In such a perspective, so they are the YouTube of art collectors, and apparently they define what is legitimate transformative use and what not. So in such a perspective, copyright runs the risk of becoming a privilege again after 500 years. Do we want that? Now I know, I don't.